He wasn't supposed to find them that night. Not in a storm that swallowed sound and erased tracks within seconds. Not in a place where even the wind seemed to forget what it was chasing. But sometimes the smallest cries carry farther than thunder. And sometimes they reach the one soul who still knows how to listen. The snow had been falling for hours across a forgotten stretch of mountain road just outside Gunnison, Colorado, piling up in soft, suffocating layers that hid everything beneath it. Trees bowed under the weight, the air sharp enough to sting the lungs, the kind of cold that didn't just touch your skin but slipped into your bones and stayed there. And somewhere beneath that white silence, a German shepherd mother lay curled around what little warmth she had left, her body trembling in slow, fading waves, her breath shallow, barely visible. While beside her, small shapes struggled blindly against the cold, tiny paws pushing, slipping, searching for something they couldn't understand but refused to stop needing. A single puppy, no bigger than a man's hand, broke free from the shallow hollow where they had been hidden, its movements clumsy, determined, its body shaking as it crawled into the open snow, each inch forward a quiet defiance against a world that had already decided it wouldn't make it through the night. Miles away, Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes gripped the steering wheel of his old Ford pickup, the heater barely keeping up with the cold bleeding through the metal frame, his eyes scanning the narrow road ahead through streaks of blowing snow, the headlights cutting a weak path through the storm. He wasn't supposed to be out there either, not this late, not after a long day at the base. But sleep had refused him again, like it often did, and the silence of his cabin had felt heavier than the storm outside. So he drove. No destination, just motion, just something to keep the memories from catching up. The radio crackled softly, but he turned it off. Something about the night felt different, too quiet in the wrong places, too loud in others, like the world was holding its breath. And then he heard it, faint at first, almost nothing, a thin, broken sound that slipped through the howl of the wind and landed somewhere deep in his chest. He frowned, easing off the gas, listening harder, the tires crunching slowly over packed snow as he rolled forward. The sound came again, barely there, not quite a bark, not quite a cry, something in between, something that didn't belong out here alone. Daniel pulled the truck to the side, engine idling low, and for a moment he just sat there, hands still on the wheel, staring into the storm as if it might answer him. Then he reached for his flashlight, the familiar weight grounding him, and stepped out into the cold, the wind hitting him like a wall, sharp and relentless, his boots sinking a few inches into fresh snow with every step. He moved slowly, listening, turning his head slightly as he followed the faint direction of the sound. Every instinct sharpened, the same instinct that had kept him alive in places far worse than this. And then the beam of his light caught something, not movement. At first, just a shape, low to the ground, half buried, almost part of the snow itself. He stepped closer, the light steady now. And that's when he saw her, the German shepherd, her coat stiff with frost, her body curled tightly around something hidden beneath her, her eyes barely open but still watching, still aware, and just beyond her, the tiny puppy struggling in the open snow let out one more fragile sound, a whisper of life that refused to disappear. And in that moment, Daniel understood one simple truth. If he had driven 10 seconds faster, if he had ignored that sound, if he had chosen warmth over instinct, this story would have ended right there, in silence, buried beneath a storm that never looked back. Daniel dropped to one knee without thinking, the snow soaking through his jeans almost instantly as he shifted the flashlight under his arm, freeing both hands, the beam trembling slightly with the wind as he reached toward the mother dog, his movements slow, deliberate, the way you approach something that has already been hurt by the world too many times. Her eyes flickered toward him, not with fear, not even with strength, but with something quieter, something that felt like recognition, as if she knew this moment mattered more than anything that had come before it. Her chest rose shallowly, each breath uneven, barely there, and when Daniel placed his gloved hand gently against her side, he could feel how cold she had become, not just surface cold, but deep, the kind that settles in when the body starts letting go. The puppy in the snow let out another thin cry, weaker now, and that snapped something inside him into motion. He shifted quickly, scooping the tiny body into his hands. It weighed almost nothing, a fragile warmth fighting against the cold air. He tucked it inside his jacket without hesitation, pressing it close to his chest, the instinct automatic, the same instinct that had driven him to carry wounded men across distances that felt impossible. He turned back immediately, brushing snow away from the mother dog's flank, revealing the small hollow she had carved out with what little strength she had left, and beneath her, there they were. 3 more puppies, barely moving, their bodies curled together in a desperate attempt to share heat. Their breathing so faint he had to lean closer just to see it. "Easy now," he whispered, his voice low and steady, though the wind tried to steal the words before they could land. He slipped one hand under the first puppy, lifting it carefully, then another, each one tucked into the front of his jacket, creating a small pocket of warmth. His heart beat strong against their fragile bodies. He could feel them shifting slightly, responding, not much, but enough to keep going. And then his attention returned to her, Luna, though he did not know her name yet. Only the weight of her choice, the way she had stayed, the way she had refused to leave even when leaving might have saved her. He slid his arm beneath her chest, testing gently. Her body was limp at first, heavier than he expected, not from size but from stillness, from the way life seemed to be slipping through her. "Come on, girl," he murmured, leaning closer, his breath visible in the freezing air. "You made it this far. Do not stop now." For a second, nothing changed. The storm pressed in, the silence stretched, and then, almost imperceptible, her ear twitched, just once. But it was enough for him to tighten his grip and lift, her body shifting against his arms as he brought her up from the snow, her head falling slightly against his sleeve, her breath brushing faintly against his wrist, weak but present, fragile but real. The wind howled louder as he turned back toward the truck, each step deliberate, careful not to slip on the uneven ground beneath the fresh snow, the weight in his arms uneven. The lives he carried balanced between seconds, the puppies tucked close to his chest, the mother cradled against him, and all around them. The storm continued without pause, indifferent, relentless, as if it had already decided the outcome and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. But Daniel did not slow. He did not look back, because somewhere between that first faint cry and the moment he lifted her from the cold, something had shifted, something quiet but unbreakable, the kind of promise. A man does not speak out loud, the kind that lives in action alone. And as the truck came into view through the blowing snow, its headlights dim but steady, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was no longer about chance. This was a race, and he had just chosen to run it until the very end. The truck door groaned as Daniel pulled it open with his shoulder, the wind forcing its way inside like it had something to prove. And for a brief second the warmth from the cab met the cold in a silent clash. He moved quickly, laying the mother dog across the passenger seat as gently as he could, her body slack but still holding on to something deep within. Then he climbed in, pulling the door shut behind him with a solid thud that cut off the howl of the storm, leaving only the low hum of the engine and the sound of his own breathing, steady but heavy. He wasted no time, shrugging off his jacket just enough to check the puppies pressed against his chest, their tiny bodies shifting faintly, one letting out a soft, broken whimper that was somehow louder in the quiet of the cab than it had been out in the storm. He adjusted them carefully, wrapping them in a spare flannel shirt from the back seat, tucking the fabric around them to hold in what little warmth they had. His hands moved with practiced precision, the same calm urgency he had carried through missions where seconds mattered more than anything else. But this was different. There were no commands here, no backup, just him and the fragile rhythm of 4 small lives balanced on the edge. He reached across to the mother dog, brushing snow and frost from her face, his fingers lingering for a moment near her muzzle, watching, waiting. Then there it was, a faint exhale, barely visible, but enough to anchor him. "Stay with me," he said quietly, his voice softer now. Not a command, not a plea, something in between, something steady. He turned the heater up as high as it would go, the vents pushing out air that was still catching up to the promise of warmth. And then he shifted into gear, the tires struggling for traction before finding it. The truck inching forward onto the narrow road, headlights cutting through the swirling snow as he guided them back the way he had come. The road felt longer now, every turn sharper, every mile heavier, the storm pressing against the windshield in waves. But Daniel kept his eyes forward, one hand on the wheel, the other reaching over every few seconds, checking, adjusting, making sure the mother dog had not slipped further away. Her head rested against the worn fabric of the seat, her ears barely twitching with the motion of the truck. And then, just as he eased around a bend, something changed, subtle but unmistakable. She shifted, not much, just enough for her head to lift a fraction before settling again, her eyes opening slightly, unfocused at first, then landing on him. And for a brief moment, the world narrowed to that single connection, man and animal, both carrying something unseen, both understanding without words that this moment mattered. The puppies stirred again, one pushing weakly against the fabric, searching, and Daniel reached over, guiding them closer to their mother, placing them gently against her side. The contact immediate, instinctive. Even in her weakened state, her body responded, her head tilting just enough for her nose to brush against them, counting, checking, holding on. And in that small movement, something deeper than survival surfaced, something that had carried her through the storm when everything else had tried to take her under. The truck continued down the road, the snow easing slightly as they descended, the outlines of distant lights beginning to appear far ahead, faint but real, and Daniel exhaled slowly, not relief, not yet, but something close, because he knew they were not safe, not fully, not until warmth settled into bone and breath returned without effort. But they were no longer alone in the storm, and sometimes that was the first miracle, not the ending, not the rescue itself, but the moment when something that was fading is seen, is carried, is given one more chance to stay. The first lights of town did not feel like safety yet. They felt distant, fragile, like something that could disappear if he blinked too long. But Daniel kept driving, easing the truck down the narrow road as the storm thinned just enough to reveal outlines of buildings and frozen fences buried under snow. The heater, now pushing steady warmth into the cab, not strong, not fast, but enough to begin the slow work of pulling life back from the edge. He glanced again at the passenger seat. The mother dog's breathing had changed, still shallow, but more regular. Each rise of her chest a quiet promise that she was not done yet. And beside her, the small bundle of puppies shifted in uneven rhythm, one of them letting out a faint sound, not a cry this time, but something softer, something closer to comfort. And Daniel exhaled slowly, his grip on the wheel loosening just slightly, not from relief, but from the realization that they had crossed something invisible, a line between losing and holding on. The veterinary clinic sat just off the main road, a small building with a single glowing sign flickering against the snow, the kind of place you might pass 100 times without noticing. But tonight it stood like a beacon, quiet and steady. Daniel pulled into the lot, tires crunching over packed snow, and cut the engine. The sudden silence inside the cab louder than the storm had been. He moved quickly, stepping out into the cold again, the air biting but no longer overwhelming. He circled the truck and opened the passenger door, reaching in carefully, his hands steady as he lifted the mother dog once more, her body still weak but no longer unresponsive, her head shifting slightly against his arm as if she could feel the difference now. The warmth, the movement, the chance. The clinic door resisted at first, locked against the late hour, but Daniel did not hesitate. He knocked hard, the sound echoing in the quiet night. Once, then again, stronger, until a light flickered on inside. Footsteps followed, and the door opened to reveal a woman in her early 40s, hair pulled back, eyes sharp but tired. The look of someone who had spent years answering calls that came at the worst possible times. She took in the scene in a single glance. The man, the dog, the urgency, and stepped aside without a word, holding the door open as Daniel carried them inside. The warmth hit immediately, thick and real, wrapping around them like something alive, the scent of antiseptic and clean linen replacing the cold. And for the first time since he had heard that faint cry on the road, Daniel felt the tension in his shoulders shift, not gone, not yet, but moving, making space for something else. The woman guided him to a metal examination table, her hands already moving with practiced precision, laying out towels, checking the puppies one by one, her voice calm, measured. "You got them here just in time," she said quietly, not looking up, but the words landed with weight. Daniel nodded once, unable to say anything yet, his attention fixed on the mother dog as she was gently settled onto the table, her eyes half open now, watching, not with fear, but with a kind of exhausted trust. And as one of the puppies let out a small, stronger sound, pressing closer to her side, she responded, her head lifting just enough to nudge them closer, counting them again, making sure. They were all still there, still with her. Daniel stepped back slightly, giving space, his hands finally still, but his eyes never leaving them. And in that quiet room, with the storm fading outside and the soft sounds of life returning inch by inch, he realized something he had not expected. This was not where the story ended, not with the rescue, not with the door opening, but here, in the fragile space between what almost was lost and what might still be saved. This was where it truly began. The room settled into a quiet rhythm that felt almost fragile, as if too much noise might undo the progress already made. The woman moved with steady hands, wrapping the puppies in warm towels one by one, placing them gently beneath a heat lamp that cast a soft amber glow across the table, their tiny bodies twitching as warmth began to reach places the cold had nearly claimed. One of them let out a faint, uneven squeak. Then another followed, slightly stronger, and the sound filled the room. In a way that no words could. It was not loud, not dramatic, but it carried something deeper, something alive. Daniel stood a few feet away, his jacket hanging loosely in his hands now, forgotten, his focus fixed entirely on the mother dog as the veterinarian checked her carefully, listening, watching, measuring each breath, each subtle response. She is still fighting, the woman said quietly, her voice calm but certain. That is what matters right now. Daniel nodded once, his throat tight, his eyes never leaving the table. Luna's chest rose and fell with more consistency now, still shallow, still fragile, but no longer fading into stillness. Her ears shifted slightly at the sound of her puppies, and that small reaction seemed to ripple through her entire body, like a signal reminding her why she had held on this long. The veterinarian adjusted the blanket around her, then paused, her hand hovering near Luna's neck, brushing aside damp fur, and that was when she noticed it. A faint indentation beneath the thick coat, a place where a collar had once been, worn long enough to leave its mark but gone now. She glanced up briefly at Daniel. She belonged to someone, she said, not as a question, but as a quiet truth. Daniel looked at the mark, then back at Luna, something unreadable passing through his expression. Not anymore, he replied softly, the words carrying more weight than volume. One of the puppies began to move more actively now, pushing against the towel, its tiny paws searching. The veterinarian gently guided it back toward the others, then lifted another, checking its breathing, its response. They are stronger than they look, she murmured, almost to herself. They just needed a chance. Daniel exhaled slowly, those words landing somewhere deep, because he understood that better than most. The difference between ending and continuing often came down to a single moment. A single choice, a single person who decided not to walk away. Luna shifted again, this time more noticeably, her head lifting just slightly before settling back, her eyes opening a little wider, not fully aware yet, not fully present, but no longer lost. Her gaze moved slowly, unfocused at first, then landing on the small cluster of warmth beside her, her puppies, and something changed, subtle but undeniable. Her breathing deepened, just a fraction, her body tensed, not in fear, but in effort, as if she was gathering what little strength she had left and deciding where to place it. Daniel stepped closer without realizing it, his hand resting lightly against the edge of the table, not touching her, just near enough, and for a brief moment, her eyes flickered toward him again, that same quiet recognition, that same unspoken understanding passing between them. No words, no gestures, just a shared moment suspended in the soft hum of the room. The veterinarian adjusted the heat lamp slightly, the glow intensifying, casting long shadows against the walls, and outside. The storm had begun to ease, the wind no longer pressing against the building with the same force, the world beyond the windows shifting from relentless chaos to something calmer, something that allowed for breath, for pause, for the possibility of what came next. And inside that small room, surrounded by warmth and quiet persistence, The first real signs of life began to take hold, not in grand gestures, not in sudden miracles, but in the smallest movements, a stronger breath, a steadier heartbeat, a puppy pressing closer to its mother, and a mother who, despite everything, refused to let go. Time moved differently inside the clinic, slower, almost careful, as if even the seconds understood what was at stake. The soft hum of the heater and the faint ticking of a wall clock blending into a steady rhythm that filled the quiet space. Daniel remained near the table, his presence still and grounded, but his thoughts had begun to drift somewhere deeper, somewhere he usually kept locked away. Watching Luna fight for each breath stirred something he could not ignore, something that had nothing to do with snow or chance, but everything to do with memory. Years ago, on a night not so different from this one, he had held another life in his hands, a fellow Marine, barely conscious, the air thick with cold and silence, waiting for help that came just a little too late. He had told himself then that he had done everything he could, that some outcomes were beyond control, but the truth had stayed with him, quiet, persistent, asking questions he never answered. And now, standing here, watching, this mother refused to give in. Watching these small lives cling to warmth like it was the only thing left in the world, that old weight returned, not as pain, but as something unfinished. Luna shifted again, her movements stronger now, not steady yet, but intentional, her head lifting slightly as she turned toward the puppies, her nose brushing against them in a slow, deliberate motion, counting, checking, confirming that each one was still there. The veterinarian watched closely, a faint nod crossing her face. "That is a good sign," she said softly. "She knows they are here." Daniel let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding, his hand resting against the edge of the table, tightening just slightly. Because that small action, that simple awareness, meant more than any machine or measurement could show. It meant she had not given up, not on them, not on herself. One of the puppies began to move more confidently now, pushing free from the towel and pressing against Luna's side, its tiny body seeking warmth, seeking connection. And for the first time, Luna responded fully, her body shifting to make space, to allow it closer, her breathing deepening just enough to match the moment. The veterinarian adjusted the heat lamp again, the light casting a soft glow across the scene, turning it into something almost still, almost sacred, a moment suspended between what had nearly ended and what was beginning again. Daniel stepped back slightly, giving them room, but his eyes never left them, his thoughts still anchored in that quiet place where past and present met, where one night blurred into another, where choices echoed long after they were made. And in that space, he realized something he had not allowed himself to before. This was not about fixing what had been lost, not about rewriting a past that could not be changed. This was about something simpler, something harder, being there when it mattered, choosing to act when it would have been easier not to, carrying what could still be carried. The veterinarian moved beside him briefly, her voice low, respectful of the quiet that filled the room. "You did more than most would have," she said, not looking at him, but at the table, at the lives slowly finding their way back. Daniel did not answer right away, his gaze still fixed on Luna as she adjusted again, pulling the puppies closer, her body forming a barrier against a cold that was no longer there, but still remembered. "I just heard something," he replied finally, his voice calm, almost distant, "and I did not ignore it." The woman gave a small nod, understanding more than the words themselves, because sometimes that was all it took, not strength, not certainty, just the decision to listen. Outside, the storm had nearly passed, the wind settling into a soft hush, the snow falling lighter now, almost gentle, as if the world itself was easing its grip. And inside, the room held steady, warm, quiet, filled with the fragile but undeniable presence of life returning, not all at once, not in a rush, but in careful, deliberate steps, each breath a little stronger, each movement a little more certain. And in the stillness between those moments, Daniel stood, not as a rescuer, not as a hero, but simply as someone who had arrived when he was needed and stayed. The night stretched on, but it no longer felt endless. It felt held, contained. Within the quiet walls of the clinic where warmth had replaced the bite of the storm, the clock on the wall moved past midnight. then into the early hours before dawn, and still Daniel remained, seated now on a simple wooden chair near the examination table, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands loosely clasped, his gaze steady and unbroken, because something about leaving did not sit right with him, not yet, not when the story had not fully settled into its outcome. Luna's breathing had grown deeper, more stable, each inhale no longer a fragile effort but a quiet rhythm, her body no longer trembling against the cold but relaxing into the warmth that surrounded her, and beside her, the puppies had begun to find their own rhythm too, small movements becoming stronger, more purposeful, one of them letting out a soft, almost content sound as it pressed closer to her side, and Luna responded immediately, her head lifting just enough to nudge it gently, guiding it closer, her instincts returning piece by piece like something remembered rather than learned. The veterinarian moved in and out of the room quietly, checking, adjusting, never rushing, her presence steady, and at one point she paused beside Daniel, offering him a cup of coffee that had long since cooled but still carried warmth in its own way. He accepted it with a small nod, his hands wrapping around the cup more for the feeling than the taste. And for a while, neither of them spoke, because there was nothing that needed to be said. Everything that mattered was already unfolding in front of them. Outside, the first hint of morning began to touch the horizon, a faint light pushing against the darkness, subtle at first, then slowly growing. And with it came a stillness that only follows a storm, the kind that feels earned, like the world itself had exhaled and decided to begin again. And inside the clinic, that same quiet shift took place. Luna stirred more fully now, her head lifting higher, her eyes opening with clearer focus, scanning the room slowly before settling once again on her puppies. And this time, when she moved, it was not out of desperation, but intention. She adjusted her body to cradle them more securely, her movements careful, deliberate. And when one of the puppies let out a stronger, more insistent sound, she responded without hesitation, her nose pressing gently against it, reassuring, grounding, present. Daniel watched it all unfold, something inside him loosening in a way he had not expected, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just a quiet release, like a weight he had been carrying without realizing it had finally been set down, and for the first time since he had stepped into the storm that night. He allowed himself to breathe without tension, to sit without urgency, because the race he had been running had slowed, not finished, but no longer at the edge. The veterinarian returned once more, checking Luna carefully, then glancing at Daniel with a small, knowing expression. "She is going to make it," she said softly, the words simple, but they landed with a certainty that did not need emphasis. Daniel looked back at Luna, at the puppies now shifting with growing strength, at the way the light from the window began to fill the room, and he nodded once, not in surprise, but in acknowledgement, as if part of him had already known, as if that first faint sound in the storm had carried more truth than doubt. Luna's eyes met his again, clearer now, steadier, and for a moment, everything else faded, the room, the clock, the passing of time, all of it narrowing to that single connection. And in that silence, there was no need for words, no need for understanding beyond what already existed. She had held on through the storm. He had found her when it mattered, and somewhere between those two truths, something unspoken had formed, something that would remain long after the snow had melted and the road had cleared, a quiet bond, built not on time, but on a single night where neither of them chose to give up. Morning arrived without announcement. It simply unfolded, light filtering through the clinic windows in slow, steady bands that softened everything it touched, the harsh edges of the night replaced by something warmer, something quieter. Daniel had not noticed when he stopped watching the clock. Only that time no longer felt like something to measure but something to sit within. The chair beneath him creaked slightly as he shifted, his body reminding him of the long night. But he did not move far, not yet, not while the room still held that fragile balance between recovery and rest. Luna was fully awake now, her head lifted, her ears adjusting to the small sounds around her, the steady hum of the heater, the faint clink of instruments in the next room, and most of all, the soft, persistent movements of her puppies. They had grown more active with each passing hour, their small bodies pressing and shifting against her, finding warmth, finding rhythm. and she responded to each one, not with urgency anymore, but with calm, deliberate care, her nose brushing against them, her body adjusting to keep them close, every movement grounded in instinct, in memory, in something that had never left her even in the coldest moment of the night. The veterinarian returned with a quiet smile, her hands moving gently as she checked Luna. Once more, listening, observing, then stepping back with a nod that carried quiet reassurance. "She is stronger this morning," she said, her voice low, respectful of the stillness. Daniel rose slowly from the chair, his movements unhurried, and stepped closer to the table, his presence no longer tense, no longer driven by urgency, but by something steadier, something that had settled into place overnight. He rested his hand lightly against the edge of the table again, the same place as before. And Luna's gaze found him almost immediately, clearer now, aware, present. And for a moment, she held that gaze, not searching, not questioning, simply acknowledging. One of the puppies let out a small, insistent sound, louder than before, and began to push forward with surprising determination, its tiny paws bracing against the towel as it made its way closer to Luna. She responded instantly, lowering her head, guiding it gently, her movements precise despite her fatigue, and as the others followed, drawn by the same instinct, the small space beneath the heat lamp became something alive, something steady, a quiet center of warmth and connection that filled the room in a way no words could describe. Daniel watched, his expression softening in a way few people had ever seen. Because this was not the kind of moment that demanded attention, it did not announce itself, it did not ask to be remembered. It simply existed, quietly, fully, and that was enough. The veterinarian stepped beside him, folding her arms loosely, her eyes on the scene before them. "They will need time," she said gently, "but they are past the worst of it." Daniel nodded once, his eyes still on Luna, still on the small, steady movements of the puppies, and for a moment, he allowed himself to think beyond the night, beyond the storm, to what came next, not in plans, not in decisions, but in possibilities. Outside, the snow lay untouched, smooth and bright under the morning sun, the road no longer hidden but revealed, stretching out in quiet lines that led somewhere forward, and inside, the room held its own kind of stillness, not the emptiness of before, but the fullness of something that had endured, something that had chosen to remain. Luna shifted once more, settling into a more comfortable position, her body relaxed now, her breathing even, her eyes drifting briefly to the puppies before returning once more to Daniel. And in that final glance, there was no urgency, no fear, only a quiet understanding, the kind that does not need to be spoken, the kind that stays long after the moment has passed, because sometimes the smallest miracles do not arrive with noise or spectacle. They arrive in silence, in warmth, in the simple act of staying when leaving would have been easier. And in that quiet room, with the light growing stronger and the storm now nothing more than a memory, that truth settled gently into place, unnoticed by the world, but deeply felt by those who had been there to see it. The day did not rush forward. It unfolded with quiet intention, the kind that follows a night where something fragile was given the chance to stay. Daniel stepped outside the clinic for the first time since arriving. The cold air no longer sharp with threat, but softened by morning light. The snow beneath his boots firm and untouched, stretching across the small town in a clean, unbroken sheet. He paused just beyond the door, drawing in a slow breath, the kind that fills the lungs completely, the kind he had not taken in a long time. And for a moment, he simply stood there, letting the silence settle around him, not empty, not heavy, just still. Inside, the world continued in quieter ways. Luna lay resting, her body no longer curled in defense but stretched slightly, allowing space for her puppies who now moved with growing certainty, their small forms pressing close, guided by instinct and warmth. The veterinarian had finished her early checks and left them undisturbed, understanding that healing sometimes required less intervention and more presence. And when Daniel stepped back into the room, the shift was immediate. Luna's ears flicked, her head turning slowly until her eyes found him again, steady now, aware, no longer searching but recognizing. And in that recognition, there was something that lingered beyond the moment, something that did not need explanation. He moved closer, slower this time, without urgency, without the weight of the storm behind him, his hand resting once more on the edge of the table. And after a brief pause, he reached forward, not with hesitation, but with respect, his fingers brushing lightly against the side of her neck. Careful, giving her the choice to accept or pull away. Luna did not move back. Instead, she leaned just slightly into the touch, a small motion, almost imperceptible, but enough to bridge the distance between them in a way that words never could. One of the puppies let out a soft, uneven bark, more sound than before, more life, and Daniel's gaze shifted downward, watching as it nudged forward, its tiny body unsteady but determined. The others followed in their own rhythm, and for a brief moment, the room filled with a quiet, imperfect chorus of small voices finding strength, and he allowed himself a faint smile, not wide, not obvious, but real. The veterinarian returned quietly, her presence gentle as she leaned against the doorway, observing the scene with a knowing expression. "They will need a place soon," she said softly, her words not pressing, just offering. Daniel did not answer. Immediately, his eyes still on Luna, still on the way she held her puppies close, the way she had held on through the night, and something settled in him then, not a decision formed by logic, but something simpler, something that did not require explanation. He nodded once, almost to himself, as if acknowledging something already understood. Outside, the road was clear now. The storm, a memory written only in the untouched snow and the quiet stillness it left behind. The world had moved on, as it always did, but inside that small clinic, something remained, something carried forward in the steady breath of a mother who refused to let go and a man who chose to stop and listen. And as Daniel stepped back slightly, giving Luna space while remaining close enough to be present, he realized that not every story ends with a moment of triumph. Not every ending needs to be loud or seen. Some stories end in something quieter, something steadier, a second chance that asks nothing more than to be honored, to be protected, to be allowed to grow. Luna's eyes followed him as he moved, calm now, certain, and in that final exchange, there was no question left, no uncertainty, just a quiet understanding shared between two lives that had crossed paths at exactly the right moment. And as the morning light filled the room completely, touching everything with a gentle clarity, the night faded fully into the past, leaving behind not just survival, but something deeper, something that would remain long after the snow had melted and the world had forgotten. A quiet promise, kept not with words, but with presence, with action, and with the simple, unwavering choice to stay.